Surveillance footage captured Bunnock Hannah Landon pulling a blue wagon through the neighborhood, a bucket inside. By morning, that bucket would reveal the body of 6-year-old Bella Fontineel. Bunnock was in a romantic relationship with Bella Fontineel's father. She was living with the family at the time. On the evening of April 25, 2023, Bella and her older sister were under Landon's care while their father worked late. Their grandmother had dropped them off after spending the afternoon together. Landon texted the father to reassure him. She said both girls were tucked in. She even mentioned that the tooth fairy had visited Bella's sister. The family had no idea what would happen that night. Bella, who was 6 years old, was harmed in a way that caused her to pass away. Prosecutors suggested that Landon may have had bitter feelings. Some of these feelings might have come from criticism by Bella's father. Even small issues, like a wagon she was using, may have upset her. These feelings, they argued, led to a calculated and shocking act. Surveillance video showed Landon wheeling a bucket inside a blue wagon. She took it to Bella's biological mother's front lawn, just across the street. She placed the bucket there as if it were trash. The bucket was found the next morning. The autopsy revealed that Bella passed from a combination of asphyxia and blunt force trauma. Experts noted bruises and scratches. These suggested she had tried to resist. There was also indication that she may have been unconscious, but still alive when placed headfirst in the bucket. Forensic investigators linked Landon to the bucket through her DNA. Surveillance confirmed that she pulled the wagon with the bucket. She also buried her cell phone at a construction site. Her phone history showed searches for legal defense options. She had also sent cryptic farewell messages to friends. Video footage from that night captured Bella crying, saying, "I want my grandma." A towel had been placed under her bedroom door. This muffled her cries, suggesting an attempt to silence her. The trial lasted 4 days. The prosecution argued that Landon knew exactly what she was doing. They said she planned each step, from the initial act to covering it up. A forensic psychologist testified that she was sane and understood her actions. The defense presented a psychiatrist who had evaluated Landon multiple times. They said she suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder from her childhood in a Khmer Rouge camp. The defense argued she was mentally impaired and did not fully understand right from wrong. The main question in court was whether this act was the result of a mental break or a planned and deliberate act. The jury concluded that Landon acted methodically, not because of trauma. The jury took less than an hour to reach a unanimous decision. Landon was convicted of first-degree harm and 2 counts of obstructing justice. On May 6, 2025, Judge Nancy Miller sentenced Landon to life in prison without parole for the first-degree harm. She received an additional 80 years for the 2 obstruction counts. Each count carried up to 40 years, served one after the other. The judge told Landon in court, "This court never wants you to see the light of day again," referring to both the life sentence and the obstruction terms. Bella's family shared emotional testimonies in court. Her 9-year-old sister wrote a letter that their mother read aloud. "To me, Bella wasn't just my sister, she was my best friend. I always saw my future growing with a mini-me. You have taken that away. Now she is my guardian angel. Someday I will forgive you, because I want to be in heaven to see Bella." Bella's mother addressed Landon directly. "You made a decision that changed the course of all our lives. You condemned Bella's sister to a life of not getting to know her sister past the age of 6. The judge reflected on the case, saying it was worse than I imagined, and that evil was on full display. The next case shows how a child was revived twice, only to be sent back to the same danger. Whitney Ard lived in Baton Rouge. She was a young mother. In 2022, she faced serious charges after her 2-year-old son, Mitchell Robinson III, passed from a substance overdose. Local reports identified her as the child's mother and a resident of East Baton Rouge Parish. The case quickly moved from a local tragedy to a criminal investigation that attracted attention across the state. What makes this case stand out is the pattern of events that led to Mitchell's final overdose. He was not taken to the hospital just once. He had been treated for suspected overdoses at least 2 times in the weeks before he was lifeless. On April 12, 2022, Mitchell was brought to the emergency room unresponsive. Medical staff used naloxone, also called Narcan, to revive him. He recovered. Hospital staff reported the incident to child welfare authorities. Then, on June 4, 2022, the same child again became unresponsive and needed naloxone to be revived. After that second hospital visit, a report was made to the state child welfare agency. Medical personnel again raised concerns. A pediatric emergency doctor later confirmed that illegal substances had been detected in Mitchell's system. The child's history included a 3rd overdose episode on June 26, 2022, which proved fatal. These repeated emergencies, were warning signs that did not result in protective intervention before Mitchell's demise. At the same time in June, law enforcement carried out a search of the home. Investigators found large amounts of illegal substances. Prosecutors later said the home contained hundreds or even thousands of potentially fatal doses. They argued the environment itself was dangerous for a small child. Prosecutors described the home as basically a trap house with kids. They said the amount of substance found could harm an adult user, much less a toddler. From public records, the case had two tracks. One track was criminal. Police investigated after Mitchell's demise and arrested Whitney Ard and others at the home on drug-related charges. The other track was administrative. The State Office of Inspector General looked into how the Louisiana Department of Children and Family Services handled the earlier reports. The Inspector General report found a chain of missteps and misunderstandings. It showed how intake workers and supervisors misread test results and did not act quickly enough to remove Mitchell from a home where he had already had 2 overdoses. The report emphasized that naloxone use should have triggered a more urgent response because it indicates opioid exposure, even if routine drug tests were negative. The report changed the public conversation. It showed that medical staff had saved Mitchell twice and that social workers were aware of the problem but did not do in-person checks in time. The report also led to administrative consequences inside the agency and prompted calls for structural change. One official review said the system failed the child, even as prosecutors prepared a case against Whitney Ard. Prosecutors filed a second-degree charge instead of a lesser one. They pointed to 3 main pieces of evidence. First, Mitchell had been overdosed and revived twice before his final overdose. Second, the home contained enough substance to harm many users. Third, the pattern of neglect and exposure showed serious disregard for the life of a young child, not just a tragic accident. These facts led a grand jury to upgrade the earlier charges to second degree. Prosecutors told jurors this was not a single mistake. They said it was a pattern of exposing a child to a dangerous environment and failing to protect him. The jury agreed. The defense offered a different picture. They said Whitney Ard was struggling with addiction herself. They argued she was overwhelmed and not acting with intent to harm. They noted the initial negative drug tests and confusion about what naloxone reversals meant. The defense emphasized system failures, that hospitals, medical staff, and child services did not act in ways that kept the child safe. They tried to show that his end resulted from neglect and misfortune, not deliberate harm. The jury did not accept that view. At trial, prosecutors presented the hospital visits and emergency rescues in order. They reminded jurors that a toddler had needed naloxone twice in a short time. They highlighted the items found in the home and evidence that the substance was in Mitchell's system. Witnesses included medical staff who described his symptoms and emergency interventions, and law enforcement who described the substance seizure. The prosecution argued that the repeated overdoses and the dangerous home environment showed reckless disregard for a child. The defense focused on addiction, confusion, and missed opportunities by agencies and hospitals. They asked the jury to see Whitney as a parent in need of help, not someone who wanted harm to come to her child. The district attorney's office argued that the repeated overdoses and the dangerous substance supply showed more than incompetence. They said it met Louisiana's legal standards for criminal responsibility. After deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on the second-degree charge. Whitney Ard faced life in prison under Louisiana's sentencing rules. On October 21, 2024, a judge sentenced her to life without parole. Sentencing included statements from prosecutors and family members. The defense filed motions for a new trial and plans to appeal. These motions were denied, and standard appellate steps followed. The sentencing drew strong reactions in the community. Some said the sentence fit the danger shown by the evidence. Others pointed to the Inspector General report and questioned whether state failures had been considered. The district attorney said that a parent who exposes a child to dangerous substances must be held accountable. The OIG report explained why child services failed to remove Mitchell after 2 overdoses. Intake workers relied on routine drug screens that were negative, instead of the clinical reality that naloxone reversals show exposure. The agency was overworked, and the assigned caseworker became ill as the case opened. Staffing and process problems, combined with misunderstandings about naloxone, delayed checks that could have removed the child from danger. The Inspector General called out these breakdowns clearly. Prosecutors rejected plea offers that carried shorter sentences. They said the risk and sequence of events, repeated overdoses followed by a fatal third exposure, and the large illegal substance supply justified the higher charge. Publicly, district attorneys framed this as a duty to protect children. They said the evidence showed the child had been exposed to dangerous substances multiple times, survived, and then passed days later. Prosecutors rejected a plea with a shorter sentence because they believed the facts met the standard for second-degree charges. The next case, a mother whose jealousy cost her children their lives. Amy Hebert grew up in Lafourche Parish, Louisiana. She worked as a teacher's aide at Lockport Lower Elementary School. Amy married Chad Hebert, and together they had 2 children, Camille, born in 1998, and Braxton, born in 2000. The marriage eventually ended. Their divorce was finalized in 2006. Afterward, Chad started a new relationship and later married another woman. Friends and neighbors described Amy as someone active in her church. Before the divorce, she was involved in family life and school activities. But in the years after, her family members and experts noticed serious changes. They said she showed signs of deep depression and growing distress related to the breakup of her marriage. On the morning of August 20th, 2007, investigators discovered something that shocked the local community. Amy had harmed both of her children, as well as the family dog. Camille was 9, and Braxton was 7. Reports from the coroner described many wounds on both children. They also had injuries that showed they tried to protect themselves. Amy herself had several self-inflicted injuries. She was taken to a hospital and treated in the intensive care unit. After she recovered, she was placed under custody. The discovery happened because a family member went to check on her house. A coworker had noticed Amy never showed up for work that day, and that concern led to someone calling the family to look in. People in the area asked the same question: what would make a parent do something like this? At trial, prosecutors leaned on one explanation. They said the motive was jealousy and revenge. Investigators found handwritten notes from Amy, addressed to her ex-husband and his mother. These notes, along with statements she made to medical staff and psychiatrists, showed anger about Chad's new relationship. She also feared losing her place in her children's lives. At one point, Amy told a psychiatrist that she heard a voice she believed was Satan. Her defense team argued she was suffering from severe mental illness and depression. The case came down to 2 very different explanations. Prosecutors said it was revenge, while the defense said it was serious mental illness. The jury had to decide which they believed. Amy was formally charged with 2 counts of first-degree unlawful taking of life. The trial lasted several days. Prosecutors presented the handwritten notes and other evidence to show motive. The defense brought in mental health experts. They testified that Amy was either psychotic or so deeply depressed that she could not form the intent needed for first-degree charges. The jury rejected the insanity defense. They convicted her on both counts. After the verdict, the case moved to the penalty phase. Jurors had to decide whether to recommend capital punishment. In Louisiana, that decision must be unanimous. In Amy's case, 9 jurors voted in favor, but 3 did not. Because of that, the law required an automatic alternative sentence, 2 life terms without the possibility of parole. The judge ordered the sentences to run one after the other. He explained that this was because 2 lives had been lost. Amy appealed the decision for years. Her legal team argued she did not have proper legal support and that she had been legally insane when the incident happened. Both state and federal courts denied these appeals. In 2019, the United States Supreme Court refused to review her case. That left the conviction and the sentences in place. After sentencing, Amy was first sent to the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women. Over time, she was moved to different facilities as the state handled system changes. The community was left heartbroken. Memorials and funds were created in Camille and Braxton's names. Amy's lawyers continued to file appeals, but with the final denial in 2019, the legal chapter of the case came to a close. The next case, a toddler's injuries told a hidden truth. Twyana Thomas was living in Kenner, Jefferson Parish, Louisiana. She shared an apartment with her young children when the events that led to her life sentence unfolded. Public records and trial reports focused on her relationship with one of her children, a boy identified in court papers as CT. His name, Chase, appeared in news releases. Court documents show she had several children present in the apartment the night officials responded. Beyond that, there is little public detail about her extended family or childhood. Most reporting centered only on what happened to Chase and her earlier contact with medical professionals and investigators. On the evening of September 30th, 2017, emergency responders arrived at Thomas's apartment after a 911 call reported a child struggling to breathe. When officials entered, they found 2-year-old Chase unresponsive. He had bruises and other visible injuries. Medical experts later explained that he was extremely underweight and dehydrated. At the time, he weighed only about 15 pounds. That is the weight of a much younger infant, not a boy close to 3 years old. Examiners determined he had head injuries caused by blunt force. They also found signs of repeated harm, ongoing mistreatment, and malnutrition. Paramedics describe both fresh and old bruises, scars, and evidence of long-term neglect. One of the most damaging pieces of evidence against Thomas was a recorded phone call from jail. In it, she admitted that she used to whoop Chase, and that she accidentally caused his passing. Other calls and records revealed a history of injuries dating back to 2015, when Chase had been treated at a hospital for trauma. Medical experts testified that his weight had dropped severely after that earlier hospital visit. They explained that the repeated injuries, along with the lack of medical care and nutrition, showed ongoing neglect. The state described Chase's suffering as a mix of repeated physical harm and prolonged food deprivation. The jury was asked to consider both immediate head trauma and long-running neglect. Experts agreed that the head injury was the final cause, but they also pointed out that chronic malnutrition and untreated medical needs left him too weak to recover. In other words, the jury heard evidence of both a fatal blow and an ongoing pattern that led up to it. A Jefferson Parish grand jury indicted Thomas for second-degree harming of a child. Her trial began in August 2019. Prosecutors presented medical testimony, hospital records going back to 2015, photos, witness statements, and the recorded calls. The jury deliberated for just over half an hour. On August 22, 2019, they returned a guilty verdict. The charge of second-degree harming of a child during cruelty to a child carried a mandatory life sentence under Louisiana law. On September 30, 2019, exactly 2 years after Chase's passing, Judge Danielle Taylor sentenced Thomas to life in prison. She was given no possibility of parole, probation, or suspension. The judge made a strong statement during sentencing. She said, "Chase passed alone in his room, scared not of the imaginary monster in his closet, but you were the monster." Chase's scars, scabs, bruises, his broken skull, and his 15-pound body tell us that you were the hateful monster. Those words were later released to reporters by the district attorney's office. Thomas also spoke at sentencing. She told the court that Chase didn't deserve that. Prosecutors argued that Thomas's actions were part of ongoing mistreatment. They said she sometimes directed anger about the child's father toward Chase. In her own recorded calls, Thomas admitted to hitting the boy, describing it as tied to her frustrations. Medical testimony and injury patterns supported the view that Chase suffered repeated harm and neglect that ended with the head trauma. The defense objected to some of the evidence and later filed an appeal. Their main argument focused on whether earlier records of harm should have been allowed at trial. The appellate court decided that the earlier incidents were relevant, so the conviction and sentence were upheld. At sentencing, Thomas again said Chase didn't deserve that. That was one of the few personal statements recorded from her in court. Because she received life in prison instead of a capital sentence, there was no record of a final meal or last words. After the 2019 trial, Thomas filed post-verdict motions and appealed. On July 29, 2020, the appellate court confirmed both her conviction and her life sentence. The case remains a matter of public record. Courts found that evidence of repeated mistreatment, the final injuries, and Thomas's own recorded statements supported the verdict. Up next is a young mother, a fragile baby born just before Hurricane Katrina, and a desperate choice. Tiffany Monique Woods is a mother from New Orleans. In 2006, she was found guilty of second-degree wrongdoing in connection with the passing of her baby boy, Emanuel, in November 2005. A judge sentenced her to life in prison without the chance of release. Her partner, Emanuel Scott, went through trial with her and also received a life sentence. The case drew attention nationwide. This was because the baby's passing happened shortly after the family evacuated New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina. It also gained notice because Emanuel had medical challenges from the day he was born. Tiffany was still a young mother when Emanuel was born in June 2005. He came early and was unusually small at birth, weighing just over 3 pounds. Hospital records showed that he had problems feeding. Doctors gave him special formula and kept him under close medical watch. Soon after, a newborn blood test came back, showing Emanuel had a rare genetic condition called MCAD deficiency. This condition makes it hard for babies to process certain fats and to keep their blood sugar steady. Because of this, he required careful feeding and follow-up testing. 3 weeks after leaving the hospital, the family was forced to leave New Orleans due to Hurricane Katrina. They fled with 4 young children. For a while, they lived in shelters and temporary housing in northwest Louisiana. By October 2005, the family said they had run out of government vouchers used to buy the baby's formula. According to later testimony, the parents began giving Emanuel organic cow's milk instead. Over the following weeks, his condition weakened. On the morning of November 27th, Tiffany and Emanuel Scott found their baby unresponsive. They called 911. A medical examination later determined that the cause was severe malnutrition. Prosecutors argued that switching to cow's milk for such a fragile, premature baby played a direct role in his decline. They also brought in testimony that this was not the first time there had been concerns. Records showed at least one older child in the household had previously been involved in a case with Child Protective Services for neglect. These facts, according to the state, supported a charge of second-degree wrongdoing under Louisiana law. Why did Tiffany choose cow's milk? She explained that she was desperate. She said Emanuel was spitting up formula, the vouchers had run out, and she tried something else she thought might work. The defense argued that Tiffany made a poor choice under extreme stress, and that she lacked full understanding of the medical needs her baby had. Prosecutors countered by saying that the household still had food and that Emanuel showed visible signs of weakening that were ignored. In the end, the court accepted the state's version and found both parents guilty. There is no question that Emanuel was medically vulnerable. He had been born premature, and his newborn test showed a condition that made him more at risk. Doctors at Tulane had kept him on round-the-clock feeding and even used a tube to support him in the hospital. After discharge, there were missed follow-up tests, and with the added chaos of Hurricane Katrina, his care had gaps. This medical background was at the center of why experts and prosecutors insisted that formula, not cow's milk, was critical for his survival. The trial was held in Caddo Parish, Louisiana. Both parents were convicted in 2006. At that time, Louisiana law required a mandatory life sentence for second-degree wrongdoing. They were given life terms at hard labor without probation or parole. The pair appealed, but the higher courts upheld the convictions. Tiffany has since spent many years in prison. Reports say that during her time inside, she completed education programs and worked to better herself. In August 2023, the Louisiana Pardon Board recommended Tiffany for release and suggested her sentence be reduced. The board pointed to her clean prison record, family support, and signs of personal change. At the hearing, Tiffany told the board she was no longer the same person and expressed regret for the choices she made. A state prosecutor opposed the recommendation. She described the baby's condition as especially heartbreaking and told the board she would go to my grave remembering this baby. The final decision was left to the governor's office. As of those reports, Tiffany remained in custody at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women, while her family publicly supported her release. At that clemency hearing, Tiffany's own words were short and direct. She said, "I made some terrible decisions." The prosecutor's words were also short and powerful. "I will go to my grave remembering this baby." Both quotes were widely reported by major news outlets covering the meeting. Up next, a courtroom heard the voice of a 5-year-old describing how his mother pushed him into the lake. If you find stories like these important, consider subscribing. Eureka Rochelle Black was a 34-year-old woman from Shreveport, Louisiana. Her family said she had struggled with untreated mental health issues for many years. Her sisters shared that she was not simply a monster. They said she was someone who needed help and had grown up feeling lonely, unwanted, and unloved. On September 24, 2021, Eureka drove to the Cross Lake Bridge. She placed her 2 young sons into the water below. One of them, Joshua, was only 10 months old. The other, Elijah, was 5 years old. Joshua did not survive. Elijah managed to live but suffered serious harm. When first responders reached Elijah, they asked him what had happened. Even though it was his birthday, he calmly explained. He said, "My mother rolled me into the water. She said it was good water and then rolled me into the water." He described it as if he had been pushed into a pool. It was sudden, frightening, and overwhelming. Her trial began in September 2023 in Caddo Parish District Court. Eureka decided to represent herself. She had lawyers available as standby counsel, but she chose not to use them. Judge Hathaway admitted that she did an unusual job representing herself, but said she did the best she could in the situation. The prosecution shared Elijah's testimony. They showed his injuries, such as a swollen eye. They also presented his statement where he said he was not sure if his mother truly loved him. Her sister also testified. Prosecutors argued that Eureka had planned her actions for about 1 to 2 days before carrying them out. The jury spent only about 2 hours in discussion before reaching a unanimous decision. They found her guilty on both counts. One was for Joshua's loss of life, the other was for the attempt on Elijah's life. On September 13, 2023, the guilty verdict was confirmed. Her sentencing followed on September 28, 2023. She received a life sentence for the count connected to Joshua. She also received 50 additional years for the count involving Elijah. The judge ordered that both sentences be served one after the other, at hard labor. Monique Kitts lived in Ascension Parish, Louisiana. In July of 2010, her name became known in a case that shocked the community. Her husband, Corey Kitts, was discovered in their home in Addis, Louisiana. He had been shot 3 times in the head while he was asleep. What first looked like a heartbreaking loss soon turned into an investigation that revealed a complex plot. Detectives learned that Monique had been trying for quite some time to find someone to take her husband's life. She spoke to an acquaintance several times, offering money to help her find a person willing to do it. At first, she offered $2,000. Later, she lowered it to $1,000, then added another $1,000, showing how persistent she was. Eventually, she was introduced to a man named Carl Howard. He agreed to carry out the act for $1,000. Howard later went into the Kitts' home and shot Corey while he slept. Investigators said Monique's motive was money. She stood to gain more than $800,000 from Corey's life insurance policy. Records showed that she asked many questions about how much she would receive and when. This made it clear to the court that she had a strong financial reason behind her actions. When the trial began, Monique testified in her own defense. She denied having anything to do with her husband's passing. She said she never asked about the insurance policy and had no idea about what had taken place in her home. But the prosecution had powerful evidence. Witnesses testified that Monique had asked them to help her find someone for the plan. There were also records proving she had been very focused on the insurance payout. The defense tried to show her as a heartbroken widow, but the jury was not convinced. The evidence made her look like someone who carefully arranged her husband's passing to benefit financially. After reviewing everything, the jury found her guilty of second-degree planning to take a life, as well as conspiracy to do so. On March 5, 2015, the judge gave her a life sentence with no chance of parole. The court highlighted that this was a deliberate plan and also a deep betrayal of trust between a wife and her husband. The next mother met in a Walmart parking lot to plan her husband's end. In the quiet town of Covington, Louisiana, a shocking story of betrayal shook a family and their community. Gina Scramuzza was 45 years old and worked as a CAT, scan technician at East Jefferson General Hospital. On the surface, she seemed to live an ordinary life. But behind the scenes, a troubling plan was forming. Gina had been married to Mario Scramuzza for more than 20 years. Mario was known as a hard-working paramedic and a volunteer firefighter. Despite their long marriage, the relationship had fallen apart. Gina confided in her boyfriend, Carlos Rodriguez, about the problems she claimed to have with her husband. Looking for a way out, she came up with a plan against Mario. In February of 2009, Gina met with Rodriguez and 2 of his friends, Luis Hernandez and Erly Montoya. The meeting took place in the parking lot of a Covington Walmart. Gina gave each of them $500 in cash. She then told them to go to her house, where Mario would soon arrive. When Mario entered the home, Rodriguez confronted him. He tied him up in the laundry room, then used a zip tie and a towel to take Mario's life. Hernandez and Montoya later said they believed they were only going there to steal from the house. They claimed they did not know the real plan. Even so, they became involved once everything unfolded. At first, Gina told authorities that Mario was missing. She also said their house had been broken into. But soon, her version of events started to look suspicious. Investigators searched the home and discovered Mario inside the laundry room. Gina's behavior began to change. What started as worry turned into visible distress, and that drew even more attention from investigators. When questioned, Gina admitted what had happened. She explained that she had organized everything and paid Rodriguez along with his friends. She also admitted that she gave them instructions on how it should be carried out. Her statement was supported by security footage, phone records, and bank records. Rodriguez was taken into custody and faced charges for his role. Hernandez was later found guilty in 2012 and was given a life sentence. Montoya admitted to his involvement and accepted a deal that gave him 35 years in prison. Gina Scramuzza admitted her role in 2013. She was given a life sentence without the chance of release. By doing so, she avoided a harsher punishment. The loss of Mario deeply hurt his family. His sister, Valerie Scramuzza Dirks, spoke about the pain everyone went through. She described how her parents suffered and how her father later passed away from heartbreak. Mario's son, who was only 13 years old at the time, was left to grow up without his father. Gina's actions changed everything for those around her. Her son lost a father, and the community lost a man who served others as a paramedic and firefighter. What began as a broken marriage ended in betrayal, loss, and lasting heartbreak for an entire family. Emma Raine's life was filled with events that later drew attention for all the wrong reasons. In 1994, her first husband, Leroy Evans, passed away under circumstances that raised suspicion. No charges were filed at that time. In 2006, her second husband, Ernest Smith, was discovered in their New Orleans home after being shot several times. Then, in 2011, her third husband, James Raine, also lost his life in their Mississippi residence. By then, Emma had already remarried. Investigators began to notice a pattern. They started looking closely at her connections to both incidents, although no charges were ever filed in James Raine's case. The case that finally went to trial centered around Ernest Smith. Prosecutors argued that Emma, together with her third husband, James Raine, had planned for Ernest's life to be taken so they could collect a large insurance payout. They said that James Raine's adoptive brother, Alfred Terry Everett, was brought in to carry it out. Eventually, Everett admitted his role. He said he had been promised $10,000. This confession became a key piece of evidence linking Emma to the plan. The reason behind it all, according to prosecutors, was money. Emma had raised Ernest Smith's life insurance coverage from $100,000 in 1997 to $800,000 by 2005. She also had her daughter sign papers that made her the beneficiary, instead of Smith's own daughter, Queentine Jefferson, who was originally named. These moves showed just how far she was willing to go for financial gain. The trial began in August 2016. The prosecution presented Everett's admission and the forged paperwork. They said Emma's choices were deliberate and motivated by greed. The defense, on the other hand, argued that James Raine and Everett acted on their own. They said there was no direct proof connecting Emma. They also claimed that James Raine's passing in 2011 was unrelated to what happened with Ernest Smith. After hearing both sides, the jury found Emma guilty of second-degree involvement in taking Ernest Smith's life. The decision rested on the evidence of money motives and false documents. She was given a life sentence with no chance of parole. On October 21, 2016, Emma Raine was officially sentenced. The judge spoke about how serious the case was and how carefully planned the events appeared to be. Because of the conviction, the life sentence was mandatory. Emma continued to claim she was innocent, but the court's decision did not change. Kayla Giles Coutee was born in 1986 in Alexandria, Louisiana. She grew up in this city. From the information available, her early family life seemed fairly typical. However, not much is publicly documented about her parents or siblings. Her childhood remains mostly private, apart from the fact that she was raised in Alexandria. In 2014, Kayla married a man named Thomas Coutee Jr. Together, they had a daughter. At first, their marriage appeared normal from the outside. They shared responsibilities as parents and partners, but as time passed, their relationship became strained. Reports show that the bond between them weakened due to frequent tension. By 2018, the two had separated. Their separation was far from peaceful. Each of them made accusations against the other, and both requested legal protection. Court-issued protective orders were put in place, showing how unstable things had become. These legal measures suggested a pattern of ongoing conflict, where both felt unsafe in each other's presence. In August of 2018, Kayla confided to a friend that she had thoughts of causing harm to Thomas. She asked about borrowing a firearm for this purpose. Soon after, she sent the same friend a photo of a small black handgun she had bought. This was troubling because she was legally restricted from owning such a weapon due to the protective order. Despite that restriction, Kayla traveled to Dallas, Texas, where she purchased a Ruger LCP handgun. She used her concealed carry permit to do this. She also obtained concealed carry insurance, which showed she was preparing herself in case of legal consequences. On September 8, 2018, things came to a head. Kayla and Thomas had arranged a custody exchange at a Walmart parking lot in Alexandria. These exchanges were often stressful, especially when parents were not on good terms. Kayla was in her vehicle when Thomas approached. At that point, Kayla used the firearm against him, leading to his passing. Afterward, Kayla told authorities that she had acted to protect herself. She claimed she was in fear for her life and thought Thomas was about to harm her. But evidence in court painted a different picture. Surveillance video from the Walmart parking lot and witness statements showed events that did not fully match her version. The jury decided that her actions were not justified as self-defense. Instead, they concluded that she had acted with intent when she used the firearm. Kayla was found guilty of second-degree unlawful taking of life. This charge meant the act was intentional but not fully planned in advance like a first-degree case. She was also convicted of obstruction of justice, which meant she interfered with the investigation. She received a life sentence with no chance of parole or suspension. On top of that, she was given 30 extra years for the obstruction charge. During her trial, her lawyers argued that she was protected under Louisiana's Stand Your Ground law. This law allows a person to use force if they believe they face immediate danger. However, the jury also received instructions about something called the aggressor doctrine. This rule says that if someone starts the conflict, their self-defense claim may not apply. In Kayla's case, the jury concluded she had been the aggressor, which weakened her defense. Kayla's legal team filed an appeal. Her case eventually reached the Louisiana Supreme Court. On June 27, 2025, the court overturned her conviction. They found problems in how the jury had been instructed during her trial. The court explained that including the aggressor doctrine in the instructions was unfair, given the circumstances. They also pointed out that the trial judge failed to properly explain the presumption of self-defense under Louisiana law. This presumption is important because it requires jurors to consider whether the defendant reasonably believed they were in danger. Without clear instructions, the jury may not have evaluated Kayla's defense correctly. The Supreme Court emphasized that accurate jury instructions are critical, especially in self-defense cases. Because of these errors, her conviction and sentence were reversed. This reversal does not mean Kayla was declared innocent. Instead, it means she is entitled to a new trial. A retrial would give her the chance to present her defense under proper legal guidelines. Decades before these modern cases, Louisiana was shaken by a string of events tied to Clementine Barnabet, whose confessions and trial left behind one of the most disturbing chapters in the state's early 20th century history. Clementine Barnabet was born around 1894 in St. Martin Parish, Louisiana. She came from a Creole, working-class family. Her father was Raine Barnabet, a sharecropper who often got into trouble for minor offenses. Her mother was Dina Porter, described as Raine's companion. Clementine had at least one brother named Zephyrin and a half-sister named Pauline. In 1909, the family moved to Lafayette. Clementine worked as a housekeeper and lived in different small towns along the Southern Pacific Railroad line. In 1911, a wave of terrifying incidents began in several towns in southwest Louisiana and nearby Texas. Many of the victims were black families. Their homes were entered during the night, and the families were struck down with an axe. These events spread fear across those communities and quickly drew newspaper attention. Clementine was arrested in late 1911 after investigators linked her to at least one of the incidents. While being held, she gave dramatic statements. At first, she admitted to being involved in 2 family tragedies. Later, under continued questioning, she claimed she had taken part in as many as 35 and said she personally carried out around 17 to 20 of them. She told investigators that she acted as part of a group called the Church of Sacrifice. According to her, this was a religious circle that ordered punishments for families who, in her words, refused to obey messages from God. She also spoke about rituals and mixed her story with religious talk and hoodoo practices. Newspapers of the time repeated these claims, and the story spread quickly. The tragedies themselves were similar in method. Families were struck at night with an axe, and sometimes entire households were wiped out. Investigators noticed that the events in small towns like Raine, Crowley, and Lake Charles shared the same weapon and the same kind of scenes. However, the record is not clear. Some of these incidents happened while Clementine was already in custody. Others were linked to different suspects. Witness statements often conflicted. Even now, the exact truth about who was responsible for which cases is tangled. Clementine's trial began on October 21, 1912. A group of physicians hired by the court examined her. They said she was not mentally ill, but described her as morally depraved, unusually ignorant, and of a low grade of mentality. Her attorney, John L. Kennedy, argued that her confessions were unreliable. He pointed to her harsh upbringing and also questioned the forensic methods used at the time, such as how investigators matched DNA from the Andrus family to what was found on Clementine's clothing days later. On October 25, 1912, Clementine was found guilty in the case of Azima Randall. She was sentenced to spend her life at Louisiana State Penitentiary. On July 31, 1913, Clementine briefly escaped from jail. She was caught after only a few hours. From 1918 onward, while imprisoned, she was noted as a model inmate. She even worked in the prison's sugarcane fields. The 1920 census is the only surviving government record that lists her. At the time, she was recorded as 25 years old. On August 28, 1923, Clementine was unexpectedly released. Officials said that a surgical procedure carried out in prison had cured her. This was not a lobotomy, since that procedure did not exist in the United States until a decade later. The operation was performed by the prison doctor Sterling with the help of another inmate named Wyatt H. Ingram. Ingram had studied medicine while in custody and was recognized as a qualified physician and surgeon. He had originally been jailed in 1909 for taking $100,000 while working as a bank trust officer. Some researchers, such as James and James, later argued that if authorities truly believed Clementine had been responsible for all those tragedies, she would not have been freed so quickly. They suggested that she was released because the authorities themselves doubted her dramatic confessions.